what time it is, no matter where you've been. So let's do it again. Listen up and let the sun shine in. We've got soul training. Time to practice what you preach. Ooh, yeah. Yes, we do. We've got soul training.
Hey, Daniel, what's your ink pen game look like?
My ink pen game?
Yes.
Yeah. What do you mean?
What's your go-to?
Oh, I've got a. I forgot.
What
the
do you
name
go to
of
battle
it.
with?
I wish I brought one with me. I got one out in the car, but I do have the same kind that I get every time. I just don't remember what it's called. I think it's a.
Is it the G2?
I used to do the G2, and I moved on.
What happened?
Well, I started liking this other one better.
Why?
I thought it was more reliable. I liked the thickness of it better.
What directed you that way? I love G2.
Me too.
I'm not against the G2. I was a G2 man for a while.
We're all wrong sometimes, Daniel. That's
Yeah.
okay.
Well, that's all right. Next time, if I had known we were going to be discussing this, I'd have brought it in from the car, and you could have seen, and I'd let you test drive it.
Well, it's gonna be cold out there. Don't tear you long
Yeah. Okay.
out there. It's gonna be cold tonight. I'm just.
Well, the
picking
main
at
thing
you.
is you want to be able to leave your mark in the world.
That's it. Well, you can do that best with something that everybody recognizes too. I was just curious. I'm an ink pen person. Anybody that knows me, knows that I have some pens that I keep. I've been given as gifts that I keep stored away and things like that. But I was introduced to gel pens about 20 years ago when I started dating. Who is now my wife. She worked at a local office, and so she would always had these gel pens in her pocket. So I would bring a slushie and I would get an ink pen. That was our exchange. So that was the first time I'd ever used gel pens, really, to be honest with you. But I'm pretty diverse. I've got a broad repertoire of pens. I have gel.
So, what's your go-to slushie then?
I don't like slushies. It was for her. It wasn't for me. I'm not a slushy kind of person.
But she had to pay you for these.
Well, we were just bartering a little bit with ink pens. I like the gel, and the assorted colors, and you had the click feel, and it was still kind of a liquid ink. So, but now I don't know. I usually. On the run of a day like today, I've got 4 instruments with me right now. I've got the traditional, my blue G2. I've got, and I've kind of went backward a little bit. I've started moving towards the Bic, just ballpoint. I like those.
And I know this about Alan. If you ask him to borrow a pen,
I'll let you.
You're not getting one of the good ones, though. He's going to give you his worst pen.
You're getting the Bic, not the G2, huh?
That's right.
And I kind of move. I've got to where I have a lead pencil with me too, so I do a lot of different kind of work. So I'm right now, and to kind of conclude this pen episode, I have a G2 ballpoint, and I have a Click Zebra ballpoint, and I have the lead pencil, which is the Delgard made by Zebra.
So, Alan, one of the things I like about you is I just never know how you're going to start these things. I had no idea we were going to be talking about ink pens.
Well, it was going to come around eventually.
I mean, it was on the top of your head, too. Like, that was your plan. You were coming in with ink pens.
I tell everybody at home it could be a lot worse. It could be a lot worse. But, I do have them all standing at attention at my desk at home and things like that. So, but if you need an ink pen, holler at me because,
I'll get your second best one.
You'll get you won't get my.
You won't get that good.
You won't get that one. So, but you'll get something.
Okay.
I'm here. I'll always be here for you. But I want you to be able to not only leave your mark, but make an impression too.
Well, I appreciate that. I know you're the man for
ink pens.
Ink pens.
That's right. You just let me know. And
Penny for your thoughts.
Well, it would cost you an ink pen.
Okay.
It's if you want a slushie, you got to give me an ink pen. So. We will kind of move forward, and I'm so thankful that we get to be together once again, and we get to kind of begin with a question. Somebody once told me that you can tell a lot about someone by the questions they ask a lot about someone. So we've been given some questions, and I know that questions come from a good place, and I always believe the best in everybody, that they're not traps, but people are looking for answers, or otherwise they wouldn't ask them. And we've been given another good question today that I think we've all asked at different times. If we haven't, we will. And has been asked probably for hundreds, if not thousands of years, but how can God allow suffering? None of us like to suffer. If you've ever had an injury, I think about myself that one of my least favorite things to do is go to the dentist. And in order to have my teeth cleaned, I sometimes have to take some, not to be sedated, but I have to take something that's going to help me not feel the pain of having my teeth cleaned. So I don't like that pain. We've all had maybe some back issues, knee issues. That hurts. That's suffering. And we know a little bit about that. But the suffering we're talking about is maybe generational suffering, maybe suffering where people are in poverty, maybe someone who is battling a disease and having to use treatments to help them with that disease to try to prolong their life. And maybe that treatment is also painful. And it wears on you, you sit and wonder, how can a loving God allow suffering? So that's kind of the direction that we're heading. So did you want to kind of jump in on the front end about?
Yeah, when people ask this question, there's a couple of different mindsets they may be in. And if you're just dealing from a cold logic argument, it's a way that skeptics have traditionally tried to attack the existence of God, but it's really not a very good argument against the existence of God, because if you, just from cold logic, you're talking about if there's a God that knows everything, and you're not that God, so there are things that you don't know, and then one of the things he might know that you don't know is why this suffering is necessary, why this suffering has to exist. So just from cold logic, mathematical kind of calculus here, it's not a good argument against the existence of God. But having said that, a lot of times when people are coming to this with that question, they're in pain. They're not necessarily in a logical place. They're in an emotional place. And because of that, we want to avoid, I think, pat answers and dismissive answers, but you want to give some space to wrestle with that pain. But having said that, a lot of things the Bible does say about suffering, about uses for suffering, and I think we could even push back on the idea that the world would be better off without any suffering whatsoever. I think there are some valuable uses. Now, I'm not saying that about the specific pain that an individual might be in, but just suffering in general has some uses for the purpose of this world.
As I listen to you talk, I think you said something to the effect of that people are, when they ask those questions about suffering, it's because they are suffering or someone that they love has suffered. Maybe they're dealing with a void, or they have witnessed something that's very traumatic, and it's just something that you wrestle with your whole life. And they are in pain themselves, emotionally, literally, or maybe relationally, because they've seen someone deal with struggles and suffering. Many years ago, I was kind of in between part-time jobs, and I worked at a local drugstore. And the pharmacist, during the interview, he interviewed me basically in one of the aisles of his pharmacy. It wasn't real busy, so he just kind of interviewed me there. And he just said, Alan, people come to the drugstore not because things are going well. He said, generally come here because they're not feeling well, or they're sick, or they're hurting, so we need to be mindful of that. And, he knew that I think he just felt like he had to, remind me of the business that we were in, or he's in. But people ask that because they are hurting, they are suffering. And I think about, and I think you're probably going to talk a little bit about some uses, we might say, of suffering, that it does make us, for me, it makes me realize that I can't battle things on my own. I can't battle my aches and pains on my own. I can't battle my we live in a fallen world. We're going to talk a little bit about that in the first book of the Bible, Genesis 3, just in a few minutes. But I wanted to share something today. I'm not going to tell you this guy's name because most everybody listening to this podcast would know him, and I think you probably would. But this gentleman is a great preacher, and a few years ago he lost his son, and he was dealing with that, and or has been dealing with that. It's his anniversary, and he said this today, talking about uses of suffering. He says the church often gets a lot of flack from the world, and some of it, admittedly, we bring upon ourselves. But one accusation you will never be able to lay at our feet is that we don't care about our own, because we do. And he talks about the question, where is God when it hurts? And the answer is that you just look at the church for the answer. And I think about, many times have we maybe been hurting or maybe dealt with something that we may just want God to fix things immediately, but you look to the church. The church is there to help people through difficult times, and we've all been on the receiving end of that. I have. And so I think that that's something to think about too, that not that we're all out here just seeking hurt and problems so that we can see how someone's going to respond, but it's also nice to know that we're going to be there for one another as we reflect Christ, that we want to, what would Jesus do? Jesus would go help, would go minister, would serve and love and protect. So there are some uses or benefits, even as painful as it is. It makes you realize that this is a very temporary place as well. Before I hit the ball back to you, I think about being a temporary place. The other night, I went and picked our daughter up. She didn't have her car, and we're driving home, and the check engine light comes on my wife's vehicle. And I normally don't get too wound up about a lot of things, but it aggravated me because about 3 days prior to that, I just had her vehicle serviced. And I'm thinking, just got it serviced, now the check engine light's coming on. So it kind of, bugged me a little bit, but the point is that, as my daughter pointed out loudly, the check engine light's on. I said, I know, but I said, things just don't.
So that's not supposed to be on?
No, I'm glad she recognized
I thought it
that.
came like that. I didn't know.
I'm glad that she recognized that. But the point I made, was a reminder to myself, not making a teachable moment with her, but that things don't last forever. That we do need to be mindful of that. So why does a loving God allow suffering, or why are we allowed to suffer? Well, I think multiple reasons exist to answer that question. So,
Yeah, and I think that what really bothers people about suffering is specifically when they consider it to be unjust suffering. Most people aren't terribly concerned if God allows bad people to suffer. That seems fair. That seems just. But we don't want God to allow good people to suffer, or people that we perceive that don't deserve it for some reason. If you're thinking about undeserved suffering, you gotta talk about Job. And I don't think we can do this topic without talking about Job. And this world needs more Jobs. I'm all the time reading on the news about Jobless rates and how the president wants to create more Jobs and stuff like that.
you lost me there for a second. I had to adjust my headset for a second. I thought
I never know when one's coming from you because you guys can't see it, but he's so straight faced. It just appears.
Yeah, you just got to keep you on your toes.
I had high hopes for our leadership. I thought you were saying that maybe he was seeking or something for a second.
Or maybe creating some unjust suffering. Is that what?
You captured me. You reeled me in there for a second. So.
Anyhow.
So Job and Job are spelled the same. In case you didn't catch on to that. But anyway, so here Job, just to recap that story for you, he's literally the best guy in the world at the time, and Satan falsely accuses him. Satan charges to God, Job only loves you, he's only faithful to you because of the ways you bless him, the things that you do for him. Job is using you, God, And God says, no, he's not. That's a false accusation against my servant Job. I'm paraphrasing here. This isn't direct quote at all. So we get this situation with Job, where Job is one of the rare people who get the chance to be the champion on behalf of mankind, to prove that the best of us can do something that Satan says is impossible. We can love God unselfishly, non-manipulatively. Because see, when most people come to God, we come to God to manipulate Him. We come because we want Him to fix some problem we're having. And so we'll say, what do I need to do? I need to serve you. I need to not do this. I need to do this. I need to live in this way. Ultimately, at the beginning, for most people, it's not because God's worthy of that. It's because we want Him to fix something for us. And maybe that's fine to start with. We've got to grow beyond that. Well, Job has the chance to show that it's possible for a human, to love God in a non-manipulative way. And where I want to get to this ultimately is that's kind of the answer. That's kind of the takeaway for how we deal with suffering. In case we don't have time to talk about all the different uses for suffering, what we want to know is, how do I deal with suffering? And one way to deal with suffering is I have to be okay with not knowing an answer. See, with Job, he never finds out within the pages of the book of Job. He never finds out why he suffers. He never gets his answer as to why he's going through all this. And the answer is he's literally the best person in the world, and Satan is being allowed to test him. God's giving Satan enough rope to hang himself, enough rope to prove himself wrong. And if God had not allowed Satan to put Job to the test, then that false accusation against Job is going to stand. Job has that opportunity, but he never finds it out. So for us to be able to deal with suffering effectively, we're going to have to get to the point where we have the faith in God to where we're not only okay living without an answer of why am I having to suffer this circumstance, but we actually embrace that and know that I don't know why this is happening. I don't know why this is happening to my loved one. I don't see the use for it. It seems pointless to me, but I know that God knows the answers, and I trust Him that He's in control and that He knows what He's doing. He's in the driver's seat, and I'm going to be okay with that.
And I think the kind of compliment you talked about, the point, or made the point of how do we deal with suffering, how do we deal with the challenges that lay before us. For me, I always like to begin or think about awareness. If you go down, we won't read all of this, but Genesis chapter 3, third chapter of the first book, we see the temptation and the fall of man, and that we live in an imperfect world. We live in a fallen world. Prior to Genesis chapter 3, what do we see? We see life in God's garden. Adam and Eve had every single thing. They were given they had a purpose. They were working. They were taking care of things, and they had one another. All they were just given one thing to do, or not to do. But when they made the choice not to follow what God had told them to do, then that kind of, we might say, turned everything upside down. And we know choices have consequences. And even from an environment standpoint, you think about the perfection of life in God's garden. Well, now we have an imperfect, we have environmental issues, that are, man has a lot to do with some of those things, but we also have, things that are beyond our control. We live in that imperfect world of people, of sin in our life. You think about people getting in a vehicle and making a choice to drink and drive. I used to coach football with a state trooper, and he said that he did a presentation for a group of kids once, and he said, I forgot the percentage he used, but he said the majority of car accidents are driver error. Now, I know that's not news to anybody, but he says it's not mechanical, it's a choice. Speed, alcohol, under the influence, all those things. So we live in in a world where people are making choices all the time that impact generations in the moment, but also beyond. So for me, I think before anyone tries to blame God, I think we need to make sure we look at the sin that surrounds us and making sure that we're not participating in that sin. That may have a lot to do with the challenges that are in our life. Now, when you think about someone who's dealing with, say, obviously cancer, that maybe someone has done every single thing that they're supposed to do in their life, but yet they are dealing with cancer. And I think about, again, I go back to a fallen world, that this is a temporary place, and that God is not to be blamed for that. We've all lost someone, at some point, but it's hard. It's a process. I lost my father when I was 17 years old. It took me a long time to move past that, frustration, anger, not understanding things. But when I start to realize that we live in a fallen world, it's temporary, and that there were some things that contributed, to that loss, then you start to reason with it and rationalize it a little bit. So, in Genesis chapter 3, verses 17, or beginning in verse 16, God is saying to them, pretty much, here's your not reward, but here's your consequence for your choice of disobeying me. To the woman he said, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. Then he said to Adam, he said, because you have heeded the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree of which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat of it, cursed is the ground of your sake. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles he shall bring forth to you, and you shall eat the herb of the field in the sweat, and in the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you shall return. So it's a summary that basically life's going to be tough because the choice of sin. But yet the good news is that we read about in the Old Testament is that Jesus is introduced in Genesis 3, that God has a plan to rescue us. So, it's important for us to make sure that we are learning about that plan, we're obeying that plan, and to just have awareness that, while life may not seem fair, we should not blame God. It's not His fault of the sin that surrounds us.
You talk about this world being an imperfect world, and you're right, it is. And in a lot of ways, that's okay because it's meant to be a temporary world. This world is not the end goal. It's not the point. It's a time of preparation for the life to come that is going to last forever and ever. And so, whatever is happening on this world is there to prepare us, to give us that opportunity, to get us ready for that life to come. And suffering has a role in that. You alluded to some of the causes of suffering, that suffering sometimes is caused by our own choices, sometimes it's caused by the choices of other people, and the fact that God allows free will means that a certain amount of suffering is going to exist in a world where free will exists, because people have the opportunity to make bad choices.
I always think about what's one of the best ways to love somebody is you give them a choice. Mm-hmm. I think about, and I want you to come back. I just thought about, I think right now, we as in our house, we live with two teenagers, and we're starting to see that pull away, that separation, and those kind of things. And and I think I see myself and my kids, and I'm thinking when I was that age, I wanted to be able to have a choice. If my mom really loved me, then she should give me the choice to allow me to make decisions. So I think one of the best ways that we can love someone is to allow them the choice. And God gives us that opportunity to choose. Otherwise we'd be robots.
We'd be robots. And it's to receive love from somebody that has free will is much more meaningful. If you had a baby doll or something that, they make some pretty realistic looking baby dolls now. They can do all kinds of things, like you can feed them and they can wet a diaper, and which is that's what you want in a baby doll, right? In a toy is to have to change diapers. But if that baby doll says "I love you," that doesn't mean anything to you. It has to say that. It's programmed that way. It's built that way. But when your own child says that voluntarily of their own free will, well, it means more to you. You have that opportunity to have a real relationship when free will exists that isn't there when there is no free will.
That's a great point. That really is. And I think about the free will, the choice, and tonight is the three of us, sit here in a great little air controlled building, and as far as we know, our families are okay, they're safe, and maybe that question of how can a loving God allow suffering is maybe not weighing on us that much right now, but I think it's time for us to also realize, use our time wisely to think about that how temporary things are, and that as hard as it is, not focus on the present, but focus on the eternal of things that are going to last. I think about is life fair? Sometimes I guess that's kind of a junior question to that. Is life fair? And that life's not always fair. Life's not always balanced, and like you said, the first thing we want to do is to blame God or find someone to be our fixer, to fix, something, or to maybe someone I deserve, that fill in the blank. I've never done anything wrong to anybody. Then, so life is, maybe we feel like life isn't fair, but when we realize we have perspective and awareness, then we realize that, like you talked about with Job, that we need to have perspective and balance and not be caught up in the heat of the moment.
You say, is life fair? And what I always say to that is, no, life's not fair, and we ought to thank God every day that it's not fair, because what we deserve, based on Romans 6:23, the wages of sin is death. Well, and Romans 3:23 lets us know that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. What we deserve, because all of us have sinned, is death, and that's the due penalty of it. So we ought to be thankful for that. We were talking about this in the teenage class the other night. I was a guest teaching in there, and
I heard about that. I heard you did a really good job.
Oh, we can't believe everything here.
Well, I hope I can believe my son. I hope about Bible class. I hope.
Well, speaking of your son, I asked him the question, who are some of your heroes? And Asa spoke up and said, Alan Jones is my hero. Oh, I thought you would appreciate that.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. And so then I drilled down and I asked about what people admired about their heroes, what made them, what characteristics do they have that made them heroes. And what he mentioned about you is your work ethic, and something that is mentioned a lot of times about some others is...
You're right. You can't believe everything people say.
You're
right. You're right.
But, you couldn't have a strong work ethic if everything came easily all the time. If there had to be sacrifices that you made as you developed that work ethic. And you think about the traits of humans that are most admirable. You think about your own heroes that you might have, or literary heroes or cinematic heroes or anything like that. They're people that are generous and courageous and sacrificial. None of those things could exist in a world where there was absolutely no suffering. There'd be no need for any of those things. If there's no danger, there's no courage. If there's no need, there's no way to sacrifice. You see what I'm saying? So
it pushes us, and it pushes us.
It pushes us. It develops us. It gives us the chance for the best of humanity to shine through.
As I kind of know, it seems like one of our biggest enemies is the clock. Sometimes, and so we get going, or I lose track of time. But for me, if you go to Mark 15, beginning verse 27 through 30, I just want to end with about 3 or 4 verses, and it kind of ties all in together, because I think a lot of times, how can God allow suffering? I think when the person, and I've asked that question, I think when the person asks that question is asked could also be masked as a question of saying, how can I go on? How can God allow suffering? But really, we might be saying, how can I go on because of the suffering that I've seen or that I've experienced? And for me, one of the greatest places, I think, in Scripture that I know I turn to for myself, the days that I've been really frustrated, feeling attacked maybe, or wanted to just quit. I go to Mark 15, beginning verse 27, and we see that Jesus on the cross, what's more of a visual than that? Jesus on the cross. And it says, beginning verse 27, with him they also crucified two robbers, one on his right and the other on his left. So the scripture was fulfilled, which says, and he was numbered with the transgressors, and those who passed by blasphemed him, wagging their heads and saying, Ah, you who destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross. And I always just embrace that verse 30. Save yourself and come down from the cross. Jesus is being mocked, being dared to, and we know that if Jesus wanted to, he could wipe out everybody in the crowd or everybody that was in opposition to him, but he chose not to. And aren't we glad that he didn't? Because that gives us confidence in the hope because of his death, burial, and resurrection. And he did not give up. He chose to endure. So I always challenge myself and others to think about what you can accomplish if you choose to endure.
It's amazing. And when you look at the suffering of Jesus, it's encouraging on a number of fronts, and encourages us because we know that he, by definition, did not deserve his suffering. He suffered because of the choices of others. He suffered because of our choices, and to spare us from greater suffering that we would deserve as a result of our choices. But also, if God didn't spare his special son, Jesus, if God allowed Jesus to suffer, then suffering in this world that you or I might experience is not necessarily a sign of God's condemnation or that we're in his disfavor, but there can be a greater use for it. What about you, dear listener? Is there what has comforted you through suffering in your life from the Scriptures? What's helped you through some hard times? We'd love to hear about it. Send us an email. And that will be listed at the end of this podcast and in the outro. I'm so glad that you have listened to us and been here with us on this journey. Alan, you're the man. I appreciate so much what you've had to say today.
He's a bit of a hero, is what you mean.
He is. You're my hero too, Alan.
Well, I don't wear a cape, but the only thing I have is some really good pens.
Yeah. Well, what about tights? Do you wear tights?
I do not. No, okay. I can't because I can't put pins in them. I do not. I'm so thankful too.
They're wrapping all this up.
We get to be together, and we know that soul training is important because all souls are important. So we appreciate Daniel and Big Show Joe, and hopefully.
I didn't think that was going to stick, and you guys are hammering me on that.
I like it. Joe needs his own Facebook page.
He does. Yeah.
Big Show Joe.
I could just put that on my actual Facebook page, I suppose.
Oh, you could.
Your alter ego needs to be Big Show Joe.
The sunshine and we've got soul training. Time to practice what you preach. Ooh, yeah. Yes, we do. We've got soul training.
To learn more, you can email us at soultrainingpodcast@gmail.com, or you can write to us, P.O. Box 503, Glasgow, Kentucky, 42142. That's Soul Training.